live in a culture that really does sort of make being a morning person a virtue, and it's really not a virtue. Later school start times are associated with benefits for academic performance, for student mood, athletic performance, for the sort of overall emotional climate of the school. Teenagers, especially sleep-deprived ones, are disproportionately responsible for drowsy driving crashes, which go down in school districts that have delayed their start times. Even the minimum duration of 8 hours per night, about 70% of teens are falling short.
Dr. Wendy Troxel.
Dr. Wendy Troxel.
Dr. Wendy Troxel.
Dr. Wendy Troxel.
Clinical psychologist and internationally recognized sleep scientist and the author of Sharing the Covers.
Behavioral and social scientist, sleep expert.
She's also a licensed clinical psychologist, and she specializes in behavioral treatments for insomnia and other sleep disorders.
This is not a partisan issue, shockingly. It's a public health issue, and one that is really about optimizing the health and academic and athletic performance.
I feel like this podcast is the ball on so many of the things that families, couples struggle with. It really is.
Yes. You know, what's the first thing to go for you when you didn't get a good night's sleep? Are you a happy, cheerful human being?
Nope.
Hey everyone, Juliet here. I am so pumped to finally share something that Kelly and I have been working on behind the scenes for months. The STARET system.
If you're like us, you're juggling a demanding career, an active lifestyle, maybe even a family, and probably a million other priorities. You're the type who gives it your all, but if we're being honest, your body might not be feeling as unstoppable as it used to.
Maybe you're waking up stiff and sore, feeling drained before the day even starts, or you've got nagging aches and old injuries that keep you from the activities you love. You've tried all the programs, all the fads, and maybe you've even seen some results, but nothing sticks and it feels like you're spinning your wheels.
Problem isn't your motivation, it's your strategy. And that's where the START system comes in. We have a program designed specifically for high performers like you. This isn't about quick fixes or unsustainable routines. It's about building strength, mobility, and energy into your life in a way that works for you.
We've created a system that simplifies your approach to health and performance. During the week, you'll follow progressive workouts that prioritize strength, recovery, mobility, sleep, and sustainable nutrition. On the weekends, it's all about playing outside and doing what you love.
This is about creating a body that doesn't just survive your busy life, but thrives in it. Head over to staretsystem.com to learn more and join us. We can't wait to help you unlock the strength and energy you deserve.
Dr. Troxel, welcome to the Ready State podcast.
So nice to be here and be with you both.
Well, we were lucky enough to get to meet you at a really cool conference this last fall. And as we said in the pre-roll, sleep is one of the biggest things that we get asked about. It's one of the things that we talk about the most as one of the most important health behaviors one can do. And so we are just so excited to have your expertise here. So thank you again so much for being with us.
It's my absolute pleasure.
So we're going to start with a topic we've never covered on this podcast. And I don't think very many people have really been talking about this. And you may be unique in your research on this, but you just published an amazing book called Sharing the Covers, which is about couples and sleep. And if I'm not mistaken, the vast majority of the research done on sleep has always been on individuals in like a super controlled environment, when the reality is that most of us are sleeping with other people. So tell us a little bit about, this book and your research around couples and sleep, and then we'll dive in on some more specific questions.
Absolutely. Well, you're absolutely right that when we think about sleep, and when most researchers have thought about sleep since sleep research began, about 60 years ago, we really thought about sleep, including the risk factors of sleep and the consequences of insufficient or poor quality sleep, really at the level of the individual, largely devoid of the social context in which sleep occurs for most adults, whether that be sharing a bed with a partner, but also considering broader social environments and how they can impact our sleep. So things like the neighborhoods in which we live, we now know can have a powerful influence on our sleep. So when I came to the field of sleep over 20 years ago, and I had this idea that, wow, relationships are critically important for sleep. Relationships are critically important for health. We knew that already. And we were starting to learn 20 years ago how important sleep is for health. But nobody was connecting those different constructs. So I had the pretty obvious idea that, well, if relationships matter for health, and sleep matters for health, and most people sleep together, i.e., with a partner, then it stands to reason that how couples interact with each other and how they sleep could matter ultimately for their health and could explain in part these robust associations that we see between, for instance, being in a happy marriage and, greater longevity and greater health. And that's exactly what my research has done, is really try to unpack, the social context of sleep to understand both positive and negative influences in our closest social environments, including our couple and family relationships, and also the broader social context, how that can either support or impinge on quality sleep. And it all
If
came
we
together in my book.
it's such an amazing topic because I think everyone always thinks, which we'll get into, there are some definitely potential negative associations with sleeping with a tough partner.
This is true.
But there are also we find that there are really positive associations to it. I just love being able to see this as, I think when you ask a typical couple, how do you sleep together? They're like, what do you mean? I mean, is the bed too hot? Is it too cold? Is the air in the room? Do you like a fan? Like, people are so particular, and there are, I think, generations, at least decades old battles about how we're going to do this. Juliet has figured out that she goes to sleep first and wears earplugs, and it's no problem.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think we're right into one of the greatest topics on the planet, and you're going to save and improve lots of couples right now. So
I
let's
certainly
get
hope
in.
so.
So I just wanted to start also, it's been all over the media. I think there was a New York Times article about it, about this sleep divorce idea, and it's,
What do you mean? What is a sleep
sleep
divorce?
divorce is when people decide to sleep in separate bedrooms, even though they're married. So tell us a little bit about that. Like, how many people are actually doing this? Is this, I think generally people sort of have a negative association with this. They think, oh, okay, that must be a sign of a terrible marriage or a lack of intimacy. Like, only people who have problems would ever do that. So I think maybe that's a myth, but if you could bust any myths around sleep divorce. I also hate the name sleep divorce. It's a little harsh, but tell us a little bit about what's going on here with people sleeping in
Sleep
separate
cocooning.
bedrooms.
Well, I've offered my own alternative to sleep divorce, which is such a pejorative word and automatically, connotes ideas of, breakup, separation, all these negative meaning attached to the word divorce. So, of course, people have a lot of stigma attached to that word. So, I prefer a sleep alliance instead, because what it really refers to is the increasing number of couples. About 30% of couples, and this is regardless of age, actually, even younger couples, older couples, straight, same sex couples, many are choosing, about 30% are choosing to sleep apart at least some of the time. And the primary reason for that is because, for whatever reason, they feel that sleeping with their partner is compromising their sleep quality. And the reason why I like to sort of use a new term, one that has, not such negative connotations, is that forging a sleep alliance with your partner by hopefully having open and honest communication about what's working and what's not working in the bedroom when it comes to sleep is really about talking with your partner about how important sleep is, not only for your own individual health and well-being, but also for your relationship health. So it's focusing on the fact that, how do I as a partner, how can I be a better partner to you? And if my sleep is compromised, that's really hard to do. So I want couples to have these conversations, not to just assume that there's a one-size-fits-all sleeping strategy for all couples, which makes many couples feel stuck in a situation that may not be working for them. On the flip side, I also, Kelly, agree that there's so many fascinating and really beautiful aspects of couples who choose to sleep together, myself being one of them. There's so many benefits of sleeping together, so I don't want to undermine that. But people shouldn't go into this very intimate decision with a series of shoulds, that because society says this is the normal thing, we automatically have to ascribe to a sleeping arrangement that simply may not be working for them as a couple. So I'd like to open the door for couples to make the decision that works well for them, and then to healthily problem solve to negotiate things like maintaining intimacy, maintaining that sacred time before bed to connect and unwind, even if you choose to sleep apart.
We're gonna just bear the covers here. There's no magic time. We get into bed, I black out. Just so we're clear. I think that this is so wonderful when we start to view it as, my individual sleep needs health. And I actually think that we inadvertently have been helping people for years manage different temperatures on the side of the bed. We're huge advocates of sleeping with an eye mask. We've trained our daughter even to sleep with an eye mask when she goes on camps and tournaments. She can create her own universe with her earphones, with her eye mask, with her thing. And that's sort of just an allegory for what you're talking about, is how can we manipulate the world in a way where I can maximize my sleep and not feel weird about what are all the steps involved with potentially the most important health behavior we have, and that we get sidetracked with, I have to sleep with this person who's wrecking my sleep. I think this is so important.
And if you are sleeping with that person, all of those really important decision points, like you just mentioned, what are the health behaviors? What are the sleep health behaviors that I engage in to optimize my sleep quality? That includes going to bed at a reasonable time, waking up at a reasonable and consistent time, not bringing technology into the bedroom. Well, guess what? When you're sharing a bed with another human being, it's not just your decisions that matter, it's also the other partner's decisions that matter. And
Incredible.
in my clinical work, I see a lot of issues often come up with couples where one partner is really committed and working really hard to optimize their sleep quality. And often there's somebody who struggles with sleep problems. So they want to line up all of the factors in their favor for a good night of sleep, all the things that we know can really promote a good night of sleep. But maybe their partner isn't quite so on board. And so if there isn't an opportunity and a sort of open dialogue, that, guess what? Sleeping together doesn't just happen and you're not automatically compatible in all of your preferences and behaviors. Well, then conflict can often ensue with couples. And so I try to sort of open that dialogue in a healthy way.
So I heard you mentioned in your TED Talk that after a night of poor sleep, that men and women perceive their relationship differently. Can you talk a little bit about that? I thought that was really fascinating.
Sure. So we've done this type of study in a number of different ways. I think the one that you're referring to actually was a daily study where we studied people's sleep using both sleep diaries and wrist-worn actigraphy devices for about 10 days. And we also measured their relationship quality on a daily basis. And what we found was that there was actually this bidirectional association between sleep affecting relationship quality the next day and relationship quality also affecting sleep. But there were actually gendered differences in these directions. So by that, I mean, for men, we found that there was a stronger association between how well or not well he slept at night, predicting his next day's relationship quality. But for women, it was actually the opposite. For women, how she perceived her relationship during the day, how happy she was, how satisfied she was with her relationship with her partner, predicted not only her sleep, but also her partner's sleep that night. In other words, if she's not happy, no one is sleeping. And to adapt
Sounds
the old
like happy
adage.
wife, happy life. Right?
You got it.
So when your Oura ring is like you're nailing your sleep, nailing the recovery, I can think to myself, I'm a great husband.
Yes.
So we're saying I'm a best partner ever.
I think maybe that's what Wendy
I have
might be saying.
a-
And when she says
Objective
she's really
data.
happy and supportive, feels supported by you, you both can predict a better night's sleep.
This is amazing.
Benefits
I love
for
this.
all.
Okay, let's say that I'm in an old relationship. I've been married to Juliet. We've been together for 25 years. We find that for example, everyone, when we don't sleep in the same bed, we both sleep worse. So that's like a universal truth when we're apart. We have a big enough bed that I'm not even sure we ever touch in the night, which is again one of the ways we've created us. All right,
Which we, by the way, used to be able to sleep in a single bed together. I'm sure this is
Negative.
not very similar to many people in the world.
Yes, this changes
don't
as we
touch me.
age, doesn't it?
Don't touch me. Don't touch me. But as we're beginning to say, okay, hey, I've never considered this. where should we begin this conversation with a partner around this? And I just want to say that I have some very well-known and very influential friends who sleep. They have a sleep alliance, and they do great, and they're an amazing couple.
Yeah.
But they have a sleep alliance, and then I have some friends who have very famous people who've had huge beds. They've taken 2 king-size beds and put them together, and that's how they sleep.
Wow, that's like
And their
the
kids are-
maximal Scandinavian method. Usually it's done with twin beds, but
That's right, that's right.
That's a big bedroom too.
And they've pushed those things together, and that's how they've created happiness. And I just want to point out that there's a lot of variability, and the only thing that ultimately matters, I hope, is that you and your partner are getting better sleep, right?
Absolutely. And again, just to reiterate what you said, just as couples sleeping together doesn't guarantee that they're going to have a healthy or successful relationship, sleeping apart does not necessarily mean anything negative about the relationship. In fact, like you, I know many, many couples who swear by sleeping apart really as the key to their relationship success. So again, the key here is not to be prescriptive, not to fall into the misconception that there's one sleeping arrangement that's going to work for all couples. And to return to your really important question of, well, how do you open the door to these conversations? And that's really one of the driving forces behind my research, because before I was doing this kind of research, and now many other people are as well, there just wasn't a dialogue around, what happens with the marital bed. It was just presumed that this is what couples do. If you weren't sleeping together, then, that meant you had a loveless or sexless marriage. It was hearkening back to, these sort of puritanical views, which we were rebelling against. So we just really didn't even have an opportunity for couples to talk about whether this is working or not. And I think a great place to start is to, first talk about, how you're both sleeping, what your expectations for a good night of sleep look like, and in a really sort of non-threatening or attacking way, to talk generally about the factors that may be disrupting your sleep. Maybe it is, honey, you thrash around a lot in bed at night, and I think that wakes me up at night, and I'm experiencing it more now, especially as we get older. That's often what happens, is that sort of minor disruptions that you might have been able to sort of cope with in the past. As couples get older and as the risk for sleep disruptions gets higher, many couples want to start opening this conversation. It can also happen earlier. So first of all, how are you both sleeping? What are your expectations about sleeping together? Many couples, depending on your family background, sort of your culture, have very strong beliefs about, that the marital bed is really sacrosanct. And that's really important to honor and address, but also work through if it's not working for you. So it's about coming to it from a place of, this is such a critical health behavior that we spend about a third of our lives doing, and has such profound impacts on, our relationship health, that it really matters for us to have this dialogue in a way that's, again, not blaming, one partner or the other, but really seeking strategies that are going to promote sleep health for both of you, because that's a surefire way to promote your relationship health as well.
So, we always like to talk about the difference between night owls and morning larks here at the Ready State, because Lisa is a night owl, but she's a reformed night owl. And
work.
Kelly and I are both morning larks for sure. But I'm wondering, as you think about the complexity of negotiating the sleep thing, right? Like Kelly started to, it's like bed temperature and how much light you want and what time you want to go to bed. And, is it like, if you're young and searching for a partner, should you just make sure, like, just go ahead and make it a criteria that it's like, I'm going to choose someone who's a morning lark or a night owl or whatever I am, because I don't want to also, in addition to all the other things, negotiate like you going to bed at 9 and I go to bed at 12, or, I don't know. Tell us about that. Is it, are people incompatible?
You are
if they
so
have such-
naive to think that, like, we're at the World Championships. I'm like, look at this amazing woman I'm going to spend the rest of my life
I realize
with.
young people
Tell
are
me
never
about
gonna
your
think
sleep
about that.
schedule. That's
But,
never
is
gonna
is
But
that
it does
part-
matter, because
Yeah.
our circadian rhythms and our sleep-wake preferences dictate not just our preferred bedtimes and wake times. It also dictates, our optimal mood levels, our energy levels, our desire for sexual activity. So I would say it does matter. And I actually find it really interesting. I've commented on this in my book, that to my knowledge, dating apps and various dating programs, and premarital therapy rarely discusses circadian preferences, and yet it does matter. That said,
Massively.
I don't think it should be, a go no go criteria if you fall in love with someone who you happen to be mismatched with in terms of your circadian preference. There's also some really somewhat fascinating research on couples matching or mismatching with regard to their circadian preference.
Tell us more.
Yes. So first of all, you all being matched is the more common scenario. It is more likely for couples of, similar birds to flock together, right? Partly that has to do with other personality characteristics that tend to co-vary with people who tend to be more larks versus owls. So evening people have certain personality types in general. So there are personality differences that could cause a selection bias with, larks being more likely to pair with larks and owls with owls. There's also sort of a behavioral likelihood phenomenon going on that if you're an owl who hangs out at bars at 2 a.m., you're really unlikely to run into your future partner who might be a lark because they're not going to be out at a bar.
He's asleep.
Right.
He's asleep at the bar.
Yeah, there's just a logistics problem.
Yeah, there's a
there. That
logistics
makes
problem.
total sense.
You gotta, the two have to meet at some point. That said, even though it's more statistically likely for there to be pairs that are matched rather than mismatched, of course, we all know examples and they do exist of mismatched pairs. And the research is really interesting when it comes to mismatched pairs because it really speaks to how important these circadian preferences can matter for our relationship health. What that research generally shows, and again, I'm not trying to scare mismatched pairs who are out there, but what the research shows first is that mismatched pairs, extreme owls with extreme larks, tend to have lower relationship satisfaction, more relationship conflict, poor communication, less sexual activity. However, the caveat to that one sort of high level finding is that is only true among mismatched pairs who lack good problem solving skills. Stated differently, mismatched pairs who have good problem solving skills do not show any decrements in their relationship quality because they're able to overcome these issues. One strategy, for instance, that many couples I know do if one partner, likes to go to bed early, whereas the other one just is not sleepy at say 10 p.m., they might have some time together before the early bird goes to bed at a reasonable hour, say of 10 p.m. They might share that time in bed together before that person goes to bed so that they can have that quality time. They can be intimate. They can just talk. They can relax together. And then when it's 10 p.m. and it's the early bird's bedtime, that person goes to bed. Well, whereas the owl can leave the room quietly, go do their thing in the evening because they're just not sleepy at that time, and then return to bed at a later time. Because as much as you love a person, you cannot override your circadian rhythm just because it's your partner's bedtime. And I see that all the time too. And when people try to do that, that definitely breeds resentment and conflict because the night owl is often lying there in bed saying, I'm not even sleepy, but they're trying to go to sleep based on their partner's circadian preference and ignoring their own. And that rarely works.
And one of the things I just want to point out or posit here is that what you said is, I love this curiosity, this flexibility that you're just, hey, we're going to make an experiment tonight and we'll run the experiment and we'll recalibrate tomorrow. But you're also putting a lot of stock in the fact that people are engaging in behaviors during the day that actually set them up to be successful for sleep. And I feel like I would love for you to just kind of highlight some of your favorite sleep hygiene behaviors. We just see people chugging wine and smashing coffee late in the afternoon, and they're like, I don't know why I didn't sleep great. And I'm like, well, you sat at your desk and just, were on this depressant stimulant cycle all day. No wonder, right? Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about what you think, if I was going to have this conversation with my partner, where we might both agree to set ourselves up for the most successful night of sleep?
Yes, I'd love to do that. And I love contextualizing it with how do I have this conversation with my partner? Because I don't need to belabor with your audience who's probably heard all of the routine sleep hygiene tips over and over. But I would like to sort of put the sort of bent on that towards like, how do you engage with this as a dyadic behavior? How do you think about sleep hygiene, not just for yourself, but as a partnership? So the first thing I would say is how well you sleep at night really depends so much on how and when you start your day. And by that, I mean having a consistent wake up time is so vitally important for both of you, whether you're on separate sleep schedules or not, because wake up time is the single most important cue for setting our internal biological clocks or circadian rhythms. Wake up time is also going to govern when you're going to get morning sunlight exposure, which is another powerful cue to our circadian rhythms. It's highly alerting, it gives you energy. So how and when, and particularly the consistency of your wake up time is absolutely crucial.
Can I just interrupt really quickly?
Please.
Before you go on?
Yeah.
We recently had someone explain to us that the reason everyone feels so bad on Monday is that they basically are jet lagged because they have altered that wake time, they've altered their circadian. So normally they go to bed at 10, wake up at 6, and then all of a sudden on the weekend they're up till 12 and try to sleep till 8. And that, ultimately it's like the equivalent of being jet lagged when you start your week after a weekend like that.
Absolutely. And this is particularly tough on people who tend to be night owls, who have to then shift to a very circadian misaligned schedule during the week, whether that be an adult who is working a schedule, or as I've talked about in another of my TEDx talks, adolescents are a population who really experiences this extreme social jet lag because they are natural night owls during this developmental period, and they revert to their natural late bedtimes and wake up times on the weekends. And it results in this massive social jet lag when they have to wake up for school at an unreasonable time come Monday morning.
No parent has ever had to deal with it.
Your teenagers just bounce out of bed.
They just were like, let's go.
Yeah. All right. So let me return. So other sort of my top sleep hygiene tips, kind of with a couple's perspective. Consistent wake up time. I mentioned that.
Love that.
Have a wind down routine in the evening. Ideally, that involves your partner, right? So if you're in a couple, there's so much of our lives that are just sort of go, 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 and we're constantly connected to our phones and often neglecting, the live human being, our primary source of support, hopefully, that's right there, potentially in the room with us. And we, sort of rush off to bed with little opportunity to disconnect and unwind and connect in a real human sense, which has such powerful effects on our mood and our well-being and our physiological stress response, all of which can be very beneficial for our sleep. So building in, as busy as our lives are, recognizing that a wind down routine before bedtime, ideally that involves your partner, is not only beneficial for your relationship, to really sort of have that mindful and sort of purposeful time with your partner, but it also can really benefit your sleep by sending the right signals to the brain that it's time to disconnect from the external world and start relaxing and going into a calm state. So again, thinking about that at a couple level, I think has a number of benefits, not only for the sleep, but also for your relationships. And then finally, when it comes to technology in the bedroom, again, I speak to this not only as a sleep scientist, but also one with a great deal of relationship expertise. I know I'm probably the last human in the world, maybe you all are too, but I do not bring my phone into the bedroom. And I know that's a really hard sell to anybody out there because most people are bringing your phones into the bedroom. And even if you say you're not looking at it at night, you're just using it for the alarm in the morning, just the presence of that phone really takes your mind sort of out of the physical and the present moment and keeps you connected to the thing that is our sort of most sort of obvious sort of connection to our waking lives, right? So even having it in the room can be distracting. It can pull you away from just being there with your partner and doing the things that we know can be sleep promoting, like relaxing activities, like being intimate with your partner, like simply cuddling, all of which can promote both physiological and psychological relaxation, which can benefit better sleep.
Are you saying the phone is like a totemic object?
Well, yeah. So I just have a couple comments, and this is about to be the most Marin County thing I've ever said, but we do have this routine in our family when our hot tub isn't broken of hot tubbing together, whether it's Kelly and I, or sometimes we do it with our daughters.
Yes.
And it really is this nice, because we of course are all disconnected, and we
It's
just
dark.
it's dark outside, and it's exactly that kind of sort of pre-bed like disconnect routine that is so essential. And I can say that we all sleep better when we have that routine,
Yes.
whether that's a hot bath or whatever the routine is. But I can say for our family, that's worked really well.
Yes. I love it.
And then the other story I'll tell you is when we first bought our house back in 2009, there was actually a TV in our bedroom attached to the wall. And Kelly and I were like, yes, we're like in a hotel. This is amazing. And I think we lasted like 6 weeks or 2 months or something before we literally ripped it off the wall, because we realized that like we did not have we just would turn it on and fall asleep with it on. And it just like created all these horrible habits for us.
Right.
And we couldn't help ourselves. And so we
Do you
ripped it
remember
off
when
the
you
wall.
were pregnant and having a hard time falling asleep, and so we would watch 24 on the laptop?
Yeah.
And you would be like, I don't know why I'm so stressed before I go to bed. And I was like, well, you defeated a nuclear scourge.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that
You're
You're
we're
watching an
figuring it out.
addictive
We're
program
slowly-
that gets you
we're
restless.
I
slowly-
do love, and when people do say to me, you know, I just use my phone for alarm. I'm like, cool, you must put it on the other side of the room or in the bathroom, because you can still hear the alarm. They're like, oh, you're right.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, if it's on the floor across the room, for sure, it's probably not even there.
Yeah, and
But,
so many people are not just using it for the alarm too. It's, again, we rely too much on willpower and then feel bad about ourselves if we,
That's right.
give in. The best way to like change your behavior is just to like remove it as an option. And for many of us, again, even if it's desire, if the purpose is to have it as an alarm, I do like it across the room, but even just the presence of it there sends a signal. It's just too easy to be distracted. And remember that you're being distracted and lacking being present from your real live partner who you have probably limited time with. And the nighttime is really the sacred period for couples. That's the other reason why I find this area so fascinating. If you look across cultures, the importance of nighttime as this time of vulnerability, but also of connection. And when we think about how technology has interfered with that really sacred space, there are consequences to that. And I think we can make some small steps to recommit to, making those moments sacred, like you all have done as a family. I think it's beautiful.
This episode of the Ready State Podcast is brought to you by LMNT.
I want to have and propose the LMNT challenge.
Let's hear it.
You've heard maybe on the podcast that maybe you should delay your coffee, right? Delay your joy and your reason to wake up until a little bit later on. What I'm going to propose is not that, but if you wake up and put some LMNT into your body first thing. So first thing you do, half an LMNT into a big glass of water. It's going to be strong. I guarantee you will feel better and more awake immediately. You're going to get some hydration and some salts back into your system. The number of times we have worked with someone and been like, you know what you need right now? You're kind of sucking. How about some salt? When we put salt under their tongue or some electrolyte under their tongue and they like turn back on like wilted plants.
Yeah, and I think the hydration piece is equally as important because, it's so easy because coffee is so awesome to just wake up in the morning and only drink coffee for the first 3 to 5 hours of the morning.
You're getting hydration benefits.
Okay, I mean, let's be honest, it's pretty minimal.
I drink a long black. However,
Still.
However, what I'm talking about is less fog right away. And there's something, I always laugh, like one of my isms that you make fun of is totemic object.
Yeah.
But that salt stick is a totemic object. Like you're going to be like, oh, I have that. This water tastes good. I'm going to chug this water. And I guarantee you will feel better and different than the rest of the day.
And even better, you could actually pre-prepare it before you go to bed.
Oh, you're being all crazy.
And leave it next to your bed. And that's like your first order of business when you wake up in the morning is just chug a glass or a little bottle of, nice pre-made LMNT.
Now, if you're talking to some of our Eastern model friends, they'd say make it a hot LMNT. And I started doing that in the morning. I'm telling you, it is a game changer. Waking up with a hot, salty beverage. I'm warm. I'm moving along my fluids. It feels just better, bro.
So are we going to do the LMNT challenge now?
You take a swing at it. You'll be blown away at how much better you feel.
What do you mean you? What about us?
I don't know. You can do whatever you want. Right now, if you order through our link, you can get a free sample pack with all of LMNT's flavors, and they're considerable and pretty amazing. And if you want a party in your mouth, of course, try Sparkling LMNT. Go to drinklmnt.com/TRS for your first sample.
This episode of The Ready State is brought to you by Momentous, and we just saw something really interesting this week on Dr. Rhonda Patrick's Instagram feed about the role of vitamin D in potentially limiting our exposure to dementia. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the study points out it was a 10-year study, and after 5 years, 84% of the supplement vitamin D users were dementia-free compared to just 68% of non-users. Vitamin D reduced dementia risk by 33% in adults with mild cognitive impairment, or ApoE4, a key genetic risk factor. What's amazing about vitamin D is that we used to spend a lot more time in the sun. We are vitamin D making machines, right? We think of it as a prohormone, and then vitamin D got a little bad rap. And what it's interesting is that we forget that we used to have
Going in the sun got a bad rap.
right, that's also. We used to literally have to put vitamin D in milk because kids weren't getting enough vitamin D, and so we had to really augment
I think they
vitamin
still
D.
do. You can still go to the store and buy like vitamin D milk.
Yeah, it's right.
Yeah.
It's whole milk is called vitamin D milk. Isn't that funny? You just forget about it.
Yeah.
Even the people living in northern latitudes would have these really gnarly blue lights, these UVs, and they would expose their bodies once in a while to affect seasonal affective disorder, all the other things. It just turns out good vitamin D, is inexpensive and so easy to drop in and has so many benefits. We've talked about bone fracture risk reduction. Here we are talking about brain protection.
Yeah, and I think there's even it's been connected to reduction in risk of certain cancers. So, I mean, it really is it is like the supplement to end all supplements when it comes to overall health.
I will say our supplements with our daughters is pretty simple. We have a multivitamin, we have creatine, but they take a vitamin D every day.
100%.
Yeah, so check it out for yourself. Go explore yourself, but do get yourself an NSF certified supplement, which is crucial because you know what's in it, you know it's regulated, you know it's proofed, and that's one of the reasons we have been with Momentous from the start. If you want to learn more, go to livemomentous.com/TRS and use code TRS for 20% off your first purchase.
So nighttime routine. What else are your sort of non-negotiables, especially as you're talking with couples working through sleep? Because this is dicey area we're talking about, and it really does. I think if most couples who are listening to this, or you've ever slept with a partner, you know how real this conversation is. And if we're
Except for most people aren't actually having it. I mean, I think that's what, that's such a big takeaway for me is that, it's like it really should be part of this like premarital questionnaire or something that, all couples could bring intention to. Because I think maybe people talk about it, but it's usually only after a frustrating night's sleep or when someone, right, as opposed to saying, let's be proactive about this and actually talk about this when we're well rested.
Yes.
And
when we can to it.
And when we can problem solve and be able to be adaptable and flexible.
Yes, and absolutely. And return to it throughout the stages of your marriage or your relationship. Because again, as you all mentioned, your sleeping arrangement, probably in a twin bed when you are, newly coupled, it's quite different.
Really poor.
And, and it changes with children and with pets. And as we age and we have other, health issues that may come up or other sleep disorders that may come up or menopause, all of these things can change the conversation. And so that's why being proactive about it instead of just reactive when one partner is just feeling fed up because the other partner is seemingly interrupting their sleep. That's where sort of tensions can emerge because there's really not a safe space to discuss this. But couples absolutely should be talking about this on a regular basis. I mean, arguably, there's no other behavior that couples spend this much time doing together, right? I mean, you might like to have a workout with each other, but you're not spending 8 hours in every single workout doing it, right? Sleep is the one health behavior that occupies a huge proportion of our lives and couples routinely do together. So it stands to reason that regularly and openly in a non-threatening, non-judgmental way, just bringing up these conversations about what's working and what's not working now for both of us makes a ton of sense.
I know you have something to say, but I have to say that I'm having one of those moments where I'm like, any couple who's in therapy, this never comes up.
No, exactly. I mean,
holy moly. Like if we're really saying, hey, I know that you're I can't wait. Like my friend's like, I'm in a difficult spot with my partner. I'm gonna be like, talk about your sleep with your partner. Like what? It's so foundational. And we make so many type 1 error decisions off of this sort of dirty data. If, like, both people are not sleeping or battling in the sleep, and then we're trying to sort of correct or massage or manage or repair relationships. But wow, and the data supporting that, like, people who sleep better tend to do better. I mean, that's a really powerful place to start.
Absolutely. And there's a, really beautiful piece of evidence that speaks to what you're saying, that there is unfortunately a precipitous decline in marital satisfaction and a significant uptick in divorce and separation following the birth of a first child, right? An otherwise, really important, monumental, beautiful event for a family. But it happens to be characterized by profound sleep deprivation for both partners. And when we fail to recognize, or again, even let couples know, like, you might not be on your best behavior with your partner, they might start attributing bad behaviors to their partner to something, dispositional or as, some sort of negative characteristic of the partner, but it might be situation specific. So the benefits we could give couples by freeing them, again, not to make, sleep deprivation, the be all end all excuse for bad behavior, but sometimes contextualizing what's going on with your relationship, that I'm not able to be a good partner right now because I'm wrecked because I'm not getting the sleep I need. So how do we work on that? Right? I think that can really free couples instead of mislabeling, and, maligning the partner that they're just a bad partner, but it might be that they just can't behave well because they're so sleep deprived.
They're exhausted.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
This is
I did
so-
not take the child in and nurse her so you could sleep. That was my mistake.
This is just so important. Okay, we did a little touch on it, and because we are short on time, I want to slightly switch gears and talk about kids and sleep, which you touched on a little bit with teenagers and jet lag. But a couple just sort of quick questions. I'm hoping, how much sleep do teenagers actually need? And if a teenager is an athlete, is that a different number?
Great question. So the recommended sleep duration for teenagers on average is between 8 to 10 hours of sleep per night. As with any athlete, particularly those who have very intense training loads, we would say the upper end of that 10-hour limit plus would be the recommendation, particularly for really committed adolescent athletes. The sad truth is the vast majority of teens are not getting close to that recommended, even the minimum duration of 8 hours per night. About 70% of teens are falling short of even 70%. Some surveys show even higher percents of those failing to achieve even the minimum 8 hours recommended for this critically important developmental period. And I say that because we know adolescence is a period where we see significant spikes in the risk of mental health problems like depression, anxiety, suicide, as well as substance use, all of which are strongly linked with sleep problems. So we really need to be doing everything we possibly can as parents, as communities, and society at large to really address this issue of the crisis of insufficient sleep among adolescents.
Yeah, and
Not
not
to
even
mention just the loss of performance and spike in injuries. I think we have this, I'm like, here's your spectrum of problems. Your child may just be sucking on the field. Your child may be really having a different reaction to this, but just it is. I mean, how many children have you met that only need to sleep 6 hours? How many of those? Because we all have a special one in our family, right? Oh, you're shaking your head. There's not a single
I don't know
person.
a single
Yes,
adolescent
yes,
who performs,
Thank you,
they're
thank
at their
you.
best at, with 6 hours of sleep. They are functioning with a, sufficiently depleted battery, and that is not good for their health, their well-being, their athletic performance. And as you said, the risk of injury goes up roughly two times if they're, getting insufficient sleep. According to some Stanford research. So again, the research that we know that applies to the vital importance of sleep for every aspect of athletic performance and recovery is, if anything, even more so when it comes to our student or adolescent athletes, because all of these impacts are in the milieu of a rapidly developing brain, body, highly dynamic hormonal milieu. So all of these things can sort of
That
exacerbate.
was a very nice way. Highly dynamic
well, I think, yeah,
hormonal
You can take
milieu.
it.
and I
You
think
mean these
we
crazy teenagers?
well, and it
Yes.
was interesting because,
And
we've
sleep
talked
deprived
about, like,
teenagers.
we've talked about these two ends of the spectrum with a sleep deprived teenager, right? You have, like, severe depression on the one end or like serious injury on the other end.
Yeah.
But then I think the other thing is, I think maybe a lot, and I think you've said this before, that a lot of just the typical behaviors that we associate with teenagers, just like moodiness or seeming lazy or whatever, is, maybe partly just teenager brain, but it may also be caused by sleep deprivation.
Absolutely. Well, let me ask you, what's the first thing to go for you when you didn't get a good night's sleep? Are you a happy, cheerful human being?
No,
No.
nope. Yeah, and I heard you say, which I thought was such a good way of putting it, because the teen circadian rhythm is so different from an adult, that a teenager having to wake up at 6 for school is the equivalent of all of us adults having to wake up at 4 a.m. every day.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, we don't.
Say that again, because that really
like
puts it into
a
framework for
teenager
adults.
waking up at 6 is the equivalent of an adult waking up at 4 a.m. And we have to do that every so often when we take a flight or something. It's rare that we wake up at 4, but man, I know that when I wake up at 4 a.m., I spend the whole day like I feel physically ill and tired. And I mean, there's just so many symptoms I experience from just one day of waking up at 4 a.m. And so I think, man, like we're waking teenagers up at 6 a.m. and like this is how they feel every day.
Yes, we're turning them into shift workers with all of the consequences that go along with that. And just to expand upon what you mentioned, how I described, the teenagers wake up as being the equivalent of waking us up in the middle of our biological night. Again, the reason for this, and this is so strongly documented in the literature, is that teenagers do, in fact, have a different circadian rhythm than adults or younger children. So it's around the time of puberty that we see this shift in circadian rhythms such that teenagers are biologically predisposed to stay awake later and sleep in later. So it is not just that they're lazy or willful or disobedient. They simply
No,
aren't
those things too.
sleepy.
But
Or maybe yours. Yeah. We all have our exceptions. But no, they just can't go to sleep at 10 p.m. Most of
that's
them.
right. I fall asleep in the nines. We go to bed like 9:30 is my magic.
It
hour.
is weird when you have little kids and then they switch to being teenagers and you go to sleep before your teenagers. As a
Right?
parent, that's a weird feeling.
It's totally weird.
It is weird. I'm like, well, good luck. I hope you. So oftentimes I'm so sensitive. I am the sensitive sleeper, and if like a light flashes, like a toothbrush flashing, or I wake up and I can tell when my daughter is up. I can just hear her moving. I can see the light coming through the door. So usually I get up at 10:30 or so after I've been sleeping for a little while, going through one, and I can hear her awake, and I knock on her door and be like, all right, time's out. But she's up. And what we've done as she's gotten older, I'm talking about our 16-year-old Caroline, who's a junior, is we push her wake up till 7 o'clock. And instead of making her a breakfast where she sits down and eats, we make her breakfast to go because it guarantees her an extra half hour or so of, she can sleep till 7.
But she's also lucky. I mean, you've talked about the school start time thing, which I hope you can talk about, but I think our kids' school starts at 8:40, and that's been a newer thing. But, I know there's many factors that impact kids' sleep, but you've talked a lot about school start
I
times.
battled the head of school when I was like, hey, why is school starting so early? And she's like, well, it's good for us. And and I was like, it's bad for kids. She's like, we're never changing. And then there was a law passed in California and she had to.
Yeah.
And I remember being like, who was right now? She was like, okay, you're right.
Yes, I'm very happy to say that some of our work helped to support the passing of California's really bold law to mandate healthy school start times for adolescents. Interestingly, Florida has recently passed similar legislation. So this is not a partisan issue, shockingly. It's a public health issue and one that is really about optimizing the health and academic and athletic performance of our students. And just to, again, speak to it directly, you are fortunate to be in California and to be in a school district that is starting at 8:40 a.m. The single largest sort of policy or societal level influence that is restricting teenagers' opportunity for sleep are early school start times, because the national average in terms of when school starts across the country is about 8:03 a.m., way earlier than, what your teenagers are experiencing. And when school starts that early, that means that teenagers are having to wake up somewhere around 6 or 6:30 a.m., which I said is the biological equivalent of waking an adult up at 4 or 4:30 a.m. because of their shifted circadian rhythms. It is also virtually guaranteeing that they're going to have a really hard time hitting even that minimum 8 hours of sleep duration per night, because it would mean that they'd have to go to bed far earlier than their circadian rhythms will allow. Also, as you said, I mean, I think absolutely, I'm not absolving families of doing your jobs and doing everything you can to make other small steps to make a difference to support your adolescent's sleep. Again, like being creative about, taking breakfast on the run, or driving your kid in if the school bus shows up too early. But these are options that individual families can take. Not every family is going to have those options. And that's where evidence based, good public health policy matters. And that's why the recommendation from major medical organizations all suggest that middle and high schools start no earlier than 8:30 a.m., which is exactly the research that the state of California followed in enacting the bill SB 328, which mandated healthy school start times.
It's so
Amazing.
cool. It's so amazing. I mean, I actually had a zero period in high school, and I look back on that and I was like, zero periods should be a thing of the past.
What I think is funny is, or a little scary, is that zero periods are often like AP chemistry, which is so shocking and scary to think about teenagers who are operating on extreme sleep deprivation, going into a lab when they're half awake, if that, and then mixing dangerous chemicals. It's a
It's fine.
really
What could
bad
go wrong?
mix.
One of the things that just complicates this is that Caroline will often get home at 8:30 from practice, and now she's gotta eat something,
Yeah.
which is not conducive to immediately falling asleep.
Yeah.
She's also gotta finish homework, and she's gotta come down from an intense 2-hour practice.
Yeah.
We work with a lot of professional athletes who, after big games, will struggle to get to bed before 2 or 3 AM because they've just played in front of,
Yeah.
100,000 people, amped up, just been in a fight, and, they're like, "Okay, go to bed now," and they're like, they can't, and we've actually seen how these professional athletes all reach for THC, and they're all hitting this weed pen to do anything to hit the brakes
Right.
so they can actually start to downregulate, and clearly, that is the same thing we're asking for our kids, except they can't reach for these, substances to self-medicate. It's really amazing how many parents and families are, gotta play late, and now we gotta come down.
Well, unfortunately, many teenagers are grabbing, for substances in large part to self-medicate, whether it be cannabis, THC, or melatonin, which, many families are also, encouraging their teenagers to take really out of desperation because, as you said, it's really hard for a teenager to, first of all, unwind with all of the sort of activities happening at night. And, even without those activities, simply trying to go to bed at a time that is, early enough to allow for sufficient sleep. You know, Families are often grabbing for anything, including, medicating children, including with supplements, which are not recommended for the long term, particularly again in adolescence with a dynamic hormonal milieu, because it's constantly changing. And why would we want to be adding hormones to a already very dynamic climate? So it really does put families and children in a real bind. Again, what I suggest to families, just FYI, is, I think we need to sort of, recognize the limitations in the schedule, certainly advocate and encourage school districts to have not only healthy school start times, but also consider practice schedules. When I see hockey players, high school hockey players who don't get ice time till 10 p.m.
Right.
and then are expected to go to school by 8 a.m., that's just, it's absurd. It's just impossible. We know we're setting them up for failure at this critically important health behavior. So we need to have these broader conversations, thinking about creative strategies, whether there's, an opportunity during practice to break for a small meal so that, all of the eating doesn't have to happen so late at night, so close to bedtime. These are all strategies that, it does, it's definitely a jigsaw puzzle, but so much of it is contingent on when the school day starts for teenagers, and we really need to do better by them.
Is there, sorry to interrupt. Has there been any follow up to positive change? We know that kids should go to school later. That I think everyone would be nodding their head yes, right? You've had to walk into your kid with an AED and jumpstart them. Turn the light on and off, turn on the journey. You've got to do all the things. French techno, alarm clock. Has there been any follow up research showing the positive impacts of that in test scores or behavior? Or could you speak to that if you're aware of that?
Absolutely. So the reality is that this issue is not a new one. There's
Right.
been evidence supporting the benefits of later school start times since the 1990s, beginning with a natural experiment that occurred in a couple school districts in Minnesota. Since then, there have been a vast number of studies, all consistently showing that later school start times are associated with benefits for academic performance, for student mood, athletic performance, for the sort of overall emotional climate of the school, and even for things like health and safety, including car crash rates, which go down in school districts that have delayed their
Oh
start
wow.
times. And that's really important because teenagers, especially sleep deprived ones, are disproportionately responsible for drowsy driving crashes. So the literature is really quite unequivocal. And, as scientists, we're used to sort of talking about, balancing the research on, well, this study showed this, study showed that. Most things have some, mixture of evidence. This literature is so robust, and yet we're still having the conversation about, why schools should do this. And when it actually, you know, comes to the table in various school districts, there's often a lot of pushback, which is why it's so important for folks like you who are so respected in the athletic community to be speaking out on this, because unfortunately one of the biggest sort of deterrents or perceived deterrents to delaying school start times comes from families and the athletic community that are scared about the impact of changing start times on sports. Whereas actually, if you look at the evidence, as you know, a well-slept athlete is a better athlete. And even though training schedules may need to change, as by the way, they have in professional sports like Major League Baseball, where the players are essentially, older adolescents, they've delayed, training in some teams. So because they recognize that the sleep of these young adults is so compromised with 6 a.m. workouts.
Amazing.
So, if you're a parent listening to this that does not have a kid or has kids that aren't in California or maybe Florida now, and you were thinking, maybe you would try to bring this up in your school district, like where to begin? Is this like with your local school board or, is there something on a sort of community level that a parent listening to this could spark in their own community? Like, what would you suggest they do?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it really can depend sort of on where you are. But this has happened around the country where these sort of grassroots, sort of parent or even student led efforts have led to significant policy change, in their own school or even in their region. So, I would really start by, first of all, knowing that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. This topic has been around for over 30 years. There's tons of evidence out there, and people have already done the work for you. So you don't have to, overnight become a sleep scientist or researcher to figure this out. You can certainly listen to my TEDx talk on this. There are summary reports that are freely available online. There's an organization called Start School Later. That's an advocacy organization that does a really good job of compiling the existing research on later start times, as well as sort of policy changes in districts that have successfully made the change. And so you can follow from other successful examples instead of reinventing the wheel. And then it might involve, starting a petition in your school. Many students have done this, or going directly to the principal or the school board, presenting at a public meeting to say, wow, the entire state of California has done this, as well as numerous other individual districts around the country. And, especially when, for instance, the mission of the school right now is really prioritizing mental health and well-being of students, why wouldn't we be adding prioritizing and optimizing sleep health to, this mission, because it's actually one of the strongest things you can do to support an adolescent's mental health. So those are a number of strategies that, families, students can do to sort of get a grassroots effort rolling.
I feel like this podcast is the balm on so many of the things that families and couples struggle with. It really
Yeah.
is. Like sometimes we're always saying, "Hey, let's go first principles. Let's take care of first things first. Let's clean up the noise in the data stream so we can actually understand inputs and outputs."
Yeah.
And it really is remarkable. It's so easy to give lip service to this. And yet I work with high school athletes, I work with a lot of collegiate athletes, I work with a lot of professional athletes, and I have to have this conversation with everyone. Why aren't we still at a place where, people think we're crazy to try to get enough sleep?
Right, right. It is pretty shocking. We've come a long way, but still a long way to go when push comes to shove. And we realize we have lots of excuses to still undermine sleep. And yet it is the foundation of so much of our health and functioning, and ever more so among, young people. So we need to be doing more.
So, Wendy, we have to have you back for a part 2 because we would love to just talk to you about adults and sleep. So, if we could pre-invite you back, that would be amazing. But your book is called Sharing the Covers, and I believe it's already out and available. And so, tell us where people can find that, where they can learn more about you. You've done a couple of amazing TED Talks, both of which I watched. So, I'm sure people are going to want to consume a lot more Dr. Troxel content. So, where can they find you, buy your book, watch your TED Talk, and so forth?
Well, first of all, thank you both. You guys are just so wonderful to talk to. And I love talking to an actual couple because you really get it. And to hear about your own family experience is just, really beautiful. And so I'd be delighted to come back. And again, thanks for the opportunity to share some information about, where to find my book and other information about me. Again, my book is called Sharing the Covers, Every Couple's Guide to Better Sleep. I have a website, wendytroxel.com. I have 2 TEDx talks out there, one on adolescence and how school start times interfere with their ability to get sufficient sleep, and another on this topic of couples and sleep. So if you just Google Wendy Troxel TEDx Talks, you'll find them. I'm also on Instagram, Sharing the Covers, and Twitter at Wendy Troxel.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you for part 2.
Thank you, Sleep
Can't
Ninja.
wait. So great to see you.